Hello, welcome back to the Arturia Jupiter-8 video series. Today we're having a quick sweep of the outstanding mono effects units that we haven't dealt with yet. And let's deal with distortion first. So starting out with, I'm just going to move this out of the way. Starting out with a pretty simple saw wave as always. And we can see it also on our oscilloscope. So let's turn the unit on. We've got no drive, and even with no drive we have a distorted wave. So this is pretty important to bear in mind. There's our original signal, there's our wet signal with no drive. So this unit is having an effect right out of the gate, so don't fall into the trap of turning your drive down and thinking you're not doing anything, because you are. Perfectly normal for effects units to colour the signal even with their controls set to 0. Let's introduce the drive and see the wave change shape. So you can see on the oscilloscope the shape gets more complex, and in Insight we get again more peaks and troughs than were there without any drive. There's the sawtooth kind of mildly affected, and then as we increase the drive we've got additional harmonics interfering with the original pattern, creating constructive and destructive interference and making the pattern more complex. Now, nowhere in the manual does it actually describe what this high quality button does, but it does something. It's basically just a different distortion sound. I imagine it goes significantly beyond audible range in order to maybe filter out anti-aliasing effect. I'm not completely sure. I don't really want to guess too much. But the bottom line is we've basically got two distortion units in one. So that has quite a subtle effect from 0 to 100% on the oscilloscope, whereas in normal mode we have a much more dramatic change. Now the important thing to bear in mind with distortion is it's just extra harmonics. Distortion, you tend to think of it in terms of guitar effects. Honestly, distortion is just extra harmonics being added to the sound. If you add enough harmonics, you'll get all the way to white noise, which is the ultimate distortion. But at low levels, it's called saturation rather than distortion, because we're saturating the sound with additional frequencies, and they provide colour. That at low levels, distortion is a colour-based sound. And it can be really useful if you make a copy of something. If you've got a guitar sound and you make a copy of it, if you apply a little bit of saturation or distortion to the second track, then you eradicate a lot of the phase problems that you would otherwise have, because all of those harmonics have been affected, the frequencies of the various waves have been altered by this saturation, and it tends to eradicate a lot of phase problems. Generally speaking, though, it's just an extra little bit of colour on your sound. It's not a very intense distortion effect. Parametric EQ isn't full parametric. The low and high options are actually shelves. So if I pick this thing up, if I kind of move the frequency left and right, that's the centre point around which the EQ will be applied. Gain is whether or not we have a shelf or a floor, and the same up above as well. So that's nice and simple, but the centre two are true parametric EQs. So we choose our frequency, we choose our gain, and our Q is the intensity of the peak. So at maximum Q, it's a really sharp spike, cutting out or boosting a particular frequency. At a very low Q, it provides a much more gentle curve. So this is really, really useful for shaping your sound. This is a great little effect inside your unit. And don't forget, these mono effects, both of these mono effects up here, are in the signal chain. So you can apply this EQ at this point before you go into the filter, and that's going to have a dramatic effect potentially on the filtered sound itself. Just realised I haven't pressed a key through any of that. EQs are like probably the most basic of all of the effects we don't really need to hear. You know, you can quite clearly hear me cutting out and boosting. Various effects. Now, did you hear that sweep there? If I applied a mod to, this is band 2, so if I apply an LFO mod to that effect, so that's basically me doing this. So every one of the settings in this EQ can have a modulation effect applied to it, and again it's always the same choice. This sub-menu for all of your modulation options in the effects units, they're always the same choice, but you know, the Galaxy unit, we saw how complex and rich that was, and you can have those rotation effects, you know, feeding into these modulation settings in your EQ for some pretty crazy effects. Finally, ring mod. Ring mod is an amplitude modulation effect, which basically means, if you think like tremolo at its simplest is an amplitude modulation effect, but whereas with tremolo you're changing the volume of your wave over time, like very gently with a very like slow oscillating sine wave, for instance, with ring mod the modulations tend to be at a much faster rate, and the dramatic difference, the significant difference between ring mod and regular amplitude modulation is that with ring mod the original frequency itself is thrown away. So you basically have, if you have your middle C, if you play a note at 260 Hertz, then when you apply modulation to it at, in this case, what's this, 1.2 kilohertz, you'll end up with two new waves, one which is the sum of the two and another one which is the difference of the two. You throw away your original 260 Hertz wave and you'll end up with one at 1.46 and one at like 940 odd. That's going to produce an enharmonic sound, a pretty unnatural kind of metallic sound. So the type of stuff that you get with ring mod is usually pretty nasty. And there we go. Straight out of the gate. There's our basic saw wave, and then as soon as we apply ring modulation we get all of this nastiness. And again, as with all the other stuff, you can apply modulation effects to the unit. We slow it right down, you can actually hear and see the wave get quieter and louder. There's your amplitude modulation effect. What we can't see over here, unfortunately, if this was a sine wave, you'd basically see the original sine wave get thrown away and two new sine waves appear on either side, being the sum and difference waves. But this is a sawtooth with a much more complex kind of harmonic shape to it. But that's your fundamental effect. It's a volume modulation and amplitude modulation. Generally speaking, ring mod operates at much faster rates. So that's it for a roundup of the mono effects in the Jupiter. In the next episode, we'll deal with the remaining outstanding stereo effects, the delay and reverb. Hope to see you then. Thanks a lot.